Tennessee Titans fans, the GM Mike Borgonzi went to the podium this morning and took some questions, talked about the roster, talked about Cam Ward, talked about Jeff Simmons, talked about a lot of different things. And if you are a Titans fan and you have not watched that press conference yet, I would go to the Tennessee Titans YouTube channel and watch it, because it was the best feeling of hope that I have had surrounding this organization in quite some time listening to him today, for a litany of reasons. For one thing, I found Mike Borgonzi to be very transparent and honest in this interview, which is something that, let's be honest, you don't really get from a lot of Titans higher-ups when they talk. I mean, a lot of times when you hear from the people in the front office with the Titans, it feels very PR, and I guess that's the case with a lot of organizations. It feels very PR. It feels very, let's make sure our suits and ties are fixed. I mean, I remember when Vrabel was fired, Amy did the YouTube video, sit-down interview that was clearly edited together. I mean, it just felt so manufactured. What you got from Mike Borgonzi today was him being real and honest with the fan base about where they're at right now and how they're going to try to turn things around. Talked about a lot of things that we've been wondering about. Let's just hit on some of those topics. Jarvis Brownlee, the trading of Jarvis Brownlee Jr. and how weird it's been. Mike Borgonzi offering a little bit of an explanation today, as he said, pretty much it wasn't a culture fit. He talked about how the Titans right now, they're struggling roster-wise. They're struggling culture-wise. I don't have the exact quote. You can go watch the press conference if you want to hear. But he pretty much said, we're not at a place right now to develop a player like that. Meaning, because I know when you hear that, you think, what do you mean we can't develop a player? But he went on to elaborate that there were some issues potentially in the locker room with accountability, with cooperation from Jarvis Brownlee Jr. You can go listen to what he said. But there were some issues in the locker room, in their opinion, with Jarvis Brownlee. And you got to keep in mind, the Titans are trying to build a culture. They're trying to establish a culture. And it's hard to do when you don't have a head coach who can properly do that. But when you're trying to establish a culture, it can be difficult when you have players in the locker room that are kind of, Jarvis Brownlee was committing penalties and said he didn't feel like he had a problem. He wasn't going to change anything. That was something he actually said. And who knows what else was said between him and certain coaches and certain higher ups. They determined, hey, we can't cultivate anything here if we have players like this that are hindering a culture from being built. That's what I took from it. You can go listen for yourself. But he went in depth to explain the trading of Jarvis Brownlee, talked about the trading of Roger McCreary, pretty much said, listen, he's in a contract year. He was going to be a free agent at the end of the year, and we saw an opportunity to move up 80 spots in the draft by trading him, and so we did. It was honesty from Mike Borgonzi. It was truth from Mike Borgonzi, not trying to sugarcoat anything, but just telling you and I where we are. I thought there were great questions asked, particularly Paul Koharski asking about Mike McCoy's conservatism and punting at the Colts 42 a couple of weeks ago. Borgonzi didn't throw McCoy under the bus, but he said, hey, he's doing the best he can considering the circumstance. Everything went back to circumstance. Everything Borgonzi was talking about was pretty much alluding to the fact that this is not a good situation. This is not a good spot for anybody. And he talked about that with Cam Ward. He said, Cam Ward's a rookie quarterback, throwing to other rookies. His coach got fired in the first 6 weeks of the season, pretty much acknowledging this kid is in a bad spot, and we know he's in a bad spot. We're just trying to get him as good as we can under the circumstances, considering that this hasn't gone the way we wanted to this year. I thought it was honest. It was real. Mike Borgonzi also talking about Jeffrey Simmons and why they didn't trade Jeffrey Simmons and how he views Jeffrey Simmons. And I'll tell you what, Jeff Simmons got a major vote of confidence from Mike Borgonzi, as Borgonzi pretty much said, listen, we want a locker room full of Jeffrey Simmons. We want a bunch of Jeffrey Simmons. Jeffrey Simmons, this was a direct quote, Mike Borgonzi said Jeffrey Simmons is going to be one of the key reasons we turn things around here. Not just because of what he brings on the field, which we know what that is. He's one of the best interior defensive tackles in the NFL, but also what he brings off the field. I talked about the Jarvis Brownlee Jr. stuff and how we're trying to build a culture, and if you have players who are building the wrong culture, you kind of got to get away from them, and according to Mike Borgonzi. But Jeff Simmons is the kind of culture they want to build. A guy who leads by example, holds guys accountable, holds himself accountable, puts in the work, does everything that he needs to do, and then backs it up on the field. Like that, you want a locker room full of those guys. And so he mentioned Jeffrey Simmons. That's going to be the guy that helps us. When guys need to know what this locker room needs to look like, they will look to Jeff Simmons. When guys need to know what kind of culture we want, they will look to Jeff Simmons. A major vote of confidence for Jeffrey Simmons from Mike Borgonzi today. And then going back to Cam Ward, Mike Borgonzi did, about how he still believes Cam Ward's going to be just fine. He's got to work through some stuff just like any rookie quarterback. I agree. And talked a little bit about the head coaching search. Didn't want to get into it too much, but he said, I don't really care if it's an offensive guy. I don't care if it's a defensive guy. We need a leader. Now, this part's funny to me because when they hired Vrabel, they needed a leader. So then they had Vrabel, and then when they fired Vrabel, they said, well, we want a young offensive mind. That obviously didn't work. So now we're back to we need a leader again. But they do. That's why Mike McCarthy's name's been thrown out. That's why Robert Saleh's name's been thrown out. Like, we need a leader. We need somebody to come in and right the ship. And so Mike Borgonzi, I'm not going to go over every single thing he said in the press conference, but I thought it was really good to hear from him. I think he needs to be the guy leading the way. And regarding that, I have to commend not just Paul Koharski, who's done a great job this season reporting on the Titans. I'm going to give a shout out to Jared Stillman as well, of all people. Jared Stillman asked a couple of really good questions of Mike Borgonzi today, particularly, what's the power structure here? A lot of fans are confused on the power structure between Mike Borgonzi, Chad Brinker, Amy, who's making the decisions. Borgonzi, I thought, gave a good answer. He said, listen, I'm in charge of building the roster. Just like any other organization, I'm the GM. I'm in charge of building the roster, signing free agents, drafting guys. That's on me. Chad Brinker, as far as what he brings to the table, he's smart with cap space and working through cap space and things like that. He helps with scouting. So pretty much what I take it as is Chad Brinker is a stand-in for Amy. I think Amy wants to do as little as possible. Fine, right? That should be kind of what we all kind of want here. Amy wants to do as little as possible, and Brinker is going to be her person that fills in for her when the discussions are above her head or about stuff that maybe she is not as not her area of expertise, I will say. So I thought these were good answers from Borgonzi. I thought they were honest, they were real, they were genuine, and I think even in the middle of all of this awful football that we're seeing, I liked that Borgonzi started his press conference off by saying, we've got to gain back the trust of the fans. I'm glad they realized that. I'm glad they realized that because they can see that nobody's coming to the games. They can see that fans aren't happy. We're a small market. We're a small fan base, which means the fans that are here, our voices are heard, more likely to be heard than, say, the Green Bay Packers or the New York Giants or somebody like that. This is a small market. So our voices are more likely to be heard. They know we ain't happy. We ain't happy with what we're seeing. We got 8 games to go to kind of get these young guys more experience, and then things have got to change quick. And Borgonzi knows it. He needs to head up everything. He needs to head up the head coaching search. He needs to head up the draft. He needs to head up free agency. He needs to spearhead this thing because it seems to me he is the best football mind in this organization in terms of the front office. So we need to get behind Borgonzi. We need to stick with him a while and let him run this thing. Let me know what you think. Tighten up. Bye.